Okay, so we are here. So about 6 lines down in the wide lines on Yud Aleph Omud base, Za'aklav. So the Mishnah said, if you want to look back to the previous Omud, Yud Aleph Omud Aleph, the Mishnah said, after having talked about what about lowering branches onto a sukkah for schach with something that's still attached to the ground? We said that's possible. However, we said if sichech harbe mehen, but however, if there's kosher schach on there which is great in quantity already, or should cut san kashera, or you then cut it off, so you detach it from the ground, then it's kosher. And then the Mishnah said, Za'aklav. This is a general rule. Kol shehu mekabel tumah. Any material which is susceptible to tumah, ve'en gedulei min haaretz, and doesn't grow from the ground, ein mesachin boy, you cannot use the schach. V'chol davar she'ein mekabel tumah, but anything which isn't susceptible to tumah, ve'gidulei min hakarka, min gedulei min haaretz, mesachin boy, you can use as schach. Okay, so there are two things, two parts to it. So it has to be something which grows from the ground but is not attached to the ground. And it also has to be something which isn't mekabel tumah, even if it grows from the ground, and we'll see what that possibly could be in a minute. Okay, so says the Gemara, Za'aklal kol mekabel tumah. So the general rule is that anything which is mekabel tumah cannot be used as schach. Anything which isn't mekabel tumah can be. Says the Gemara, Mahanimili. Where do we derive this? Basically means from where are these words? Meaning, how do we derive this? Where do we know this halacha from? That schach can't be something which is mekabel tumah. So says the Gemara, Amar Reish Lakish Amakra. So Reish Lakish says, because there's a pasuk in Bereshis that says, Ve'ed ya'aleh min ha'aretz. And if I can switch between screens, you may be able to see. That switch over. Okay, so it's the pasuk here. Ve'ed ya'aleh min ha'aretz. So it's talking about right at the beginning of creation. No, it doesn't translate it very well, but a flow would well up. Ve'ed literally means mist. Translated as a flow. Ve'ed ya'aleh min ha'aretz. A mist rose up, ascended from the earth. V'ishkitas kol pnei adam, and watered the whole face of the earth. Okay, so from the ground. So ve'ed ya'aleh min ha'aretz is the pasuk we're interested in. This part of the pasuk we're interested in. So a mist ascended from the ground of the earth. Says the Gemara. Ma aid, on the next line, ma aid davar she'einu mekabel tumah v'giduli min hakarka, av sukkah davar she'einu mekabel tumah v'giduli min haaretz. Just as mist is something which isn't mekabel tumah, cannot become tamei, v'giduli min haaretz, and grows from the ground, and we'll see what that means in a minute. What does it mean mist grows from the ground? Av sukkah davar she'einu mekabel tumah v'giduli min haaretz. So too, anything that's used for schach must be something which isn't mekabel tumah and something which grows from the ground. So that's nice and clear, right? So we can learn from mist what is suitable for schach. Does that make any sense whatsoever? I mean, if you could gather mist and then put it onto your sukkah, you'd be doing very well. So firstly, how can you suggest that mist is? How do we know that mist is something which isn't a mekabel tumah? How do we know that mist isn't susceptible to tumah? And secondly, how can we even suggest that mist grows from the ground? The two things we're saying we learn from it. Mist certainly, okay, mist may not be mekabel tumah, but I don't think you'd ever suggest that mist grows from the ground, right? Yeah. So if you to eat some mist, you wouldn't say Bari B'Adama on it, right? Let's look at Rashi. So Rashi says. And you have to go a bit further up for Rashi.
Could they have used the example of mist because the sukkah is the Ananea Kavod, the clouds of glory?
Sorry, Paul. It's very hard to hear.
The sukkah, one of the things, one of the descriptions of sukkah is it's not little huts, it's the clouds of glory. Mists isn't a million miles away from being a sukkah.
Very good. Yeah, very good. Yeah, that's what all Gemara is going to say. Oh. But that's going to raise it. Very good. That's the Gemara is going to say. But that's going to raise its own problems, because as we're going to see, not everybody holds the sukkahs that they had in the Midbar were Ananei HaKavod, that they were the clouds of glory.
And also, they don't have 2.5 walls of mist.
Right, right. It's quite difficult to hear you, Paul. So I don't know if you can turn up volume or something.
I can turn up my volume. Can you hear me now?
No, that doesn't help. No, I don't know whether you can be where your microphone is. I don't know.
Oh dear.
I could just about hear you.
Now you can hear me.
Oh, that's better. A little bit better. Yeah. Okay, so let's just look at Rashi. So Rashi on the left-hand side. So let's just switch back to this. So it's here. It's quite way further up. Here. Can you see parallel with the line at the end of the line, that in between the words hub, to pasel and lan? Here, can you see that? Where the cursor is. So go across right at the end of the line. Says Rashi, Ve'ed yalem min haaretz, and the mist ascended from the earth. Shma mina ananim gidule karka ninu. So from this we can infer that clouds grow from the ground. And I think while the word the gidule or means grow, I think we can use the word originate. So according to Reish Lakish, right? So Reish Lakish said this. According to Reish Lakish, mist originates in the ground and rises upwards. It doesn't come down from the clouds the other way around. There are differences of opinion on that, but it's clear that according, says Rashi, that it would appear, we can infer from Reish Lakish that he holds that mist rises up, originates from the ground. So it's like almost like it's Gidule Karka, that it's grown from the ground. V'sukkah ma'ananim yalfinan, and we will derive, and we derive that sukkah comes from, we derive sukkah from the fact that we have a sukkah, the schach, is from the clouds of glory. Sharei zeichel anane kavod hu, because they to remind us of the anane hakavod, as a pasuk says, ki basukos hoshavti, because it says, I caused the Jewish people to dwell in sukkahs. And if you look at the pasuk here, here's the pasuk in Vayikra Chaf Gimel. Leman, why do we? Sorry, the thing that holds it. Gemara says Basukos Teshvish. Sorry, it says the Torah Basukos Teshvish Shivas Yamim. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah. Yeah, Basukos Teshuvah Shivas Yamim. You shall dwell in sukkahs for 7 days. Everybody who's part of the Jewish people should dwell in sukkahs. Why? Leman yedu dorosechem, in order that the generations should know, keep us so close. So Shaftis b'nei Yisrael, that I cause the Jewish people to dwell in sukkahs. When I brought them out of the land of Israel, Egypt, I am Hashem your God. Okay, so in that pasuk we derive, and we'll see that pasuk again in a minute. That the sukkah is derived from the Anani HaKavod. And how do we know that the Anani HaKavod, that the sukkah means Anani HaKavod? Look at Rashi, the last bit of Rashi says, the Targum, the Aramaic commentary and translation of the Torah says, Ari b'matlos anane, in like sukkahs of clouds. So when it says basukos teishvu, yeah, basukos hoshavti, that calls them to dwell in sukkahs. The Targum says, let's see if I can find the Targum here. Yeah, here you go. The Targum Onkelos, Hebrew. Yeah, here we go. Bim talios ananya. that I cause them to dwell in sukkahs of clouds. See how they translate it? So the general will know that in the clouds of shelter, sukkahs, I cause the Jewish people to dwell. Okay, so we know that the word sukkos actually is interchangeable with the word anane, clouds of glory. So there we see that this va'ei jalem min haaretz, that this mist that ascends from the earth is referring to the anane hakavod, the clouds of glory, and it's not a mekablim tuba. That's the second thing. So the first thing is, yes, as Paul quite rightly said, that that the mist is synonymous with the clouds, and that is what God calls the Jewish people to dwell in the desert. And we know that clouds are not makabel tumah, says Rashi, ein makabel tumah, d'lo nemra tumah ela b'kelim v'ochlim mashkim v'adam, because the Torah is very specific in what can become tameh. And so it tells us only kelim, vessels, utensils, v'ochlim, food, v'mashkim, and liquids, v'adam, and human beings. And clouds are not part of that definition. They're just not part of the list. And therefore we know that mist and clouds aren't makabel tumah. And therefore we derive that schach has to be made from something which comes from the ground, like the mist, and it cannot be makabel tumah like the mist, like the clouds. Is that clear? Okay, let's go back in the Gemara. So says the Gemara, middle of 6 lines up from the bottom, says the Gemara, that's this explanation. So the derivation of the mist ascended from the earth teaches us that schach has to be gedulei karka and en makabel tumah. We can learn from the fact that it's anana kavod, from mist. That's only according to the ones who say that the Jewish people dwelt in the anane, that they were surrounded by the anane hakavod. But according to the opinion that says that they literally made, that the sukkahs were literal, physical huts were made for them in the desert, what are you going to say? How's this explanation going to help you? How's this posuk going to be a source of the halacha that zehaklal, that the general rule is that the schach has to be from something that grows from the ground and something which is in makabel tumah? And now, having mentioned the fact that we have this difference of opinion as to exactly what these sukkahs were in the desert, Gemara quotes the brisa in which we learn it. The Tanya is taught in a brisa, and the pasuk says, "Ki basukos hoshavtes b'nei Yisrael," it calls the Jewish people to dwell in sukkahs. Says the brisa, "Anane kavod hayu divrei Rabbi Eliezer." Rabbi Eliezer has the opinion that these sukkahs were the clouds of glory. Rabbi Kiva Omer, sukkos mamish asu lahem. No, it says Rabbi Kiva, they literally had sukkos made for them. So huts, physical huts, were actually made for them. So we see there is a machlokus between what actually did they dwell in the midbar. Interestingly, you see the asterisk and next to the Rabbi Kiva's name here. Look in the bracket. Sorry, look in the margin, the far left-hand margin here. It tells us. B'Toras Kanim Itza, brought down in the Toras Kanim, which is the Medrash, it says Rabbi Eliezer Omer Sukkah Mamish Hayu. Rabbi Eliezer, it switches the opinions. Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that it was physical huts that they had made for them. Rabbi Shimon Omer Anane Kavod Hayu, whereas Rabbi Shimon was of the opinion that it was Anane HaKavod. And both are equally valid, but we see the opinions are attributed to different people. Okay, so we have a problem that this explanation of the Gemara that the Mishnah, when the Mishnah said it has to be these two factors of Gedulei min haaretz and in makabel tumah, only works according to the opinion that says that they dwelt in anane hakavod. Says the Gemara, now restates it again, end of the fourth line from the bottom. Hanicha l'Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara's opinion that based on this posuk in Bereshis is all very good for Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that it's Anani HaKavod. Ela Rabbi Akiva l'mayik l'meima. But for Rabbi Akiva, who says, well, actually, it's nothing to do with clouds. They were literal physical huts. What are you going to say? How are you going to derive the halacha that the sukkah, the schach has to be made from things that grow from the ground and aren't makabel tumah? So says the Gemara, Ki asa Rav Dimi. So Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babel. Amar Yochanan, he said to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan Amakra. Rabbi Yochanan quoted the pasuk that says, pasuk in Devarim, Chag HaSukkos ta'aseh lecha. A festival of Sukkos you shall make for yourself. Says Rabbi Yochanan, Makish Sukkah lechagiga. This pasuk makes a hekesh between Sukkah and Chagiga, the Korban Chagiga. Now, actually, just before we go to that, let's look at Rashi again. Further back up, a parallel with the second of the wide lines of the Gemara. Anani kavod hayu, Sukkah she'amas hakasuv, v'hoshavdim b'midbar. So the clouds of glory that are mentioned, the Sukkahs are talked about, the Pasuk, they were surrounded around in the desert. Sukkahs mamish. Why did Rabbi Akiva say that it was physical huts? On account of the heat, the sun, to give them shade. What are we going to say? According to the opinion that they dwelt in physical huts, we now don't have a source that tells us that you can't build a sukkah, you can't use schach from things like kalim, vessels, begadim, clothes, or skins, animal skins, which are all makabel tumah. Because we don't, at the moment, we don't, for that, according to that opinion, we don't have a source to say that it can't be made out of something which is makabel tumah. So says the Gemara, that's why Rav Dimi has to quote Rabbi Yochanan. So since the Torah says Chag HaSukkos, it puts the word Chag, which is the same Shosh as the word Chagiga, a festival offering, the Korban Chagiga, the festival offering. Next to the word Sukkos, it's Makishis. It makes a connection between them, an analogy between them. Ma Chagiga, Dava She'en Makabel Tumah, V'Gedulim Min Haaretz. We know that a Korban Chagiga has to be brought from something which isn't makabel tumah, and something which grows from the ground. Af sukkah davar she'ein makabel tumah v'gidulei min haaretz. So too, for a sukkah, the schach has to be made from something which isn't susceptible to tumah and grows from the ground. Okay, now that's irrefutable. Whether you hold Anani HaKavod, whether you hold Sukkos Mamish, we make a hekesh between Chagiga and Sukkah, and just as Chagiga, we know irrefutably that it cannot be something which is, you can't offer something which can be kabel tumah, and it has to be something which comes from the ground. So too, the schach has to have those two qualifications as well. Is that clear? Okay. However, there's still a question on that, because what does it mean that we bring a korban chagiga from something that grows in the ground? The korban chagiga is going to be an animal offering. So look at Rashi, and Rashi it's quite a long Rashi, which is always should worry us slightly. It's here, end of the line, actually parallel with where we started the Gemara here. Zaklal kol davar. You go across to the left, right at the end of the line. Can you see it? Here? Yeah, right at the end of the line. Says Rashi, ki chagiga. I'm not sure why it says ki chagiga, but ma chagiga it should be. So, ma chagiga, or ki chagiga kol behema. A chagiga comes from an animal, right? Says Rashi, kol behema Rabbi Yochanan gedulei karkahein. According to Rabbi Yochanan would say, actually, animals are considered to be gedulei karka. Okay, they don't grow in the ground, but that they are sustained by the ground. Look at Rashi. Shemin hakarka gedilim, because they grow from what comes from the ground. V'nizunin, and they are nourished from it. So they don't literally go from the ground, but they are nourished and therefore grow through things which come from the ground. Meaning they graze, they eat things that come out of the ground. And therefore they grow from those things which come from the ground. And therefore it's a bit of a stretch, but we can, of course, Rabbi Yochanan would say that they, by extension, are things which grow. Animals themselves could be considered as things which go from the ground. In distinction to aval dagim umelach ukamahanin upitriot lav gidule karka ninhu, whereas fish, salt, kamahin are like truffles, or pitriot like mushrooms, which don't grow, lav gidule karka ninhu, which don't go from the ground, and therefore you cannot bring them as korbanos. V'gabi maaseh karinin lulu behemoth gidule karka. So when it comes to Masa, we refer to animals as gedule karka, as things which go from the ground. Tamakraz, the Apostle says, you should give money for all those things which your soul desires. Just as there we specify and explain that fruit is from the fruit of that which goes from the karka ground. Says the Gemara, says Rashi now that this idea that Rabbi Yochanan says that animals grow from the ground only has, we can't take it to its full extension, because otherwise we will say that, well, then other things which go from the ground can be used as korbanos, because if you can use animals, you can use fruit and vegetables, which we know we can't. And it says, so we're going to see later on in our perek, ma chagiga bale chayim, v'alfinan tamim migaron achamik vecha, lo samachinan ala lachshuri l'schach ba'oros. So says Rashi says an interesting point. If we're going to suggest, if we're going to go to its full logical extension, and like Rabbi Yochanan is trying to suggest, that animals are considered to be gedule karka, they go from the ground. We've said that anything that grows from the ground and isn't the kabel tumah could be used as schach. What's the implication of that? You could put your animal on top of your as schach, or at least, okay, let's be realistic. At least its skin, its hide. You could put animal hides as schach. Why? Because according to Rabbi Yochanan, they grow from the ground. And if it's not made into a kli, if the hide hasn't been fashioned in any way, it's in its raw state, it's not makabel tumah. And therefore you could theoretically, taking to logos extension, use animal hides as schach, which we know you can't do. And that's what the Gemara later on will challenge. So you can only go so far with Rabbi Yochanan's definition when it comes to this idea of, or we can learn from chagiga that just as chagiga has to be something which comes from the ground, originates or grows from that which grows from the ground and isn't kabel tumah, they can only go so far. You can't say that the analogy is total and complete. We look at Rashi, middle of the first wide lines of Rashi. Rashi makes an interesting distinction. We've used different terms here. We said, Mishnah said, the general rule is Gidule min haaretz, that which grows from the land. I think let's use the word land. Yeah? So, so he says, okay, says Rashi, we can call animals gedule haaretz, grown from the land, because they are raised, they grow through grazing and eating from the ground. The ground sustains them. Aval gedule min haaretz lo ikri, but we can't call animals min haaretz. Yeah, we don't say hamotzi behema min haaretz. When we eat meat, we don't say borei pri ha'adama. We don't call it the fruit of the ground. Yeah. So it's an interesting distinction. We have to make this decision here. So it's gidule haaretz. It's something which is grown on account of the ground, but not grown from the ground. Ela dava, second line of Rashi. Ela dava hatsomeach min hakarka. Rather, we only call gdule min haaretz from those things which sprout from the earth, literally sprout out of the earth. V'lo behemoths, and not animals, because they don't literally sprout from the earth. They're sustained from that which sprouts from the earth. Something he quotes Gemara in Bava Messiah. Poalim ochlim b'davar shegdulim min haaretz. We talk about workers that are allowed to eat of those things which grow from the ground. And we learn it from Melot Haksom Shobadisho. We learn it from the mitzvah of you shouldn't muzzle an ox while it's plowing. Mad no dayash miyucha davash shigudim in aras, and he said dayash, which is like the whatever comes from the ground, is something which comes from the ground. Yatsa cholev, which comes to exclude anything which is like let's say what we now call a byproduct. So a byproduct of what comes from the ground, like animals, or like you could even talk about milk, or those things are byproducts of things which come from the ground. They don't come from the ground themselves. I don't want to overlay the point. That's quite obvious. Okay, so it's enough for us to be able to say that in relation to be able to derive through B'Yochanan that whatever's used for schach, again, whether you hold Anani HaKavod, whether you hold Sukkos Mamish, we learn that from the Korban Chagiga, it has to have these two qualifying factors: growth from the ground and isn't Mekabel Tumah. Okay, we turn over to Yud Beis Omid Aleph. Gemara's now going to challenge this slightly. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, that we make this hekesh between Korban Chagiga and Sukkah, then ma Chagiga Balei Chayim, av Sukkah nami Balei Chayim. Well, okay, let's take it to a logical extension then, which is just as the Korban Chagiga is brought from Balei Chayim, livestock, so too the schach should be able to be made out of livestock. Yeah, as we just mentioned, meaning like from the heights. So says Gemara, Ki asa Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So again, when Rabbi Yochanan came to Eretz Yisrael, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Amakra, the Pasuk says, okay, it says from your gatherings, from the gathering of your threshing floor and from the wine press. And let's look at the Pasuk, because we understand why this is relevant to us. Yeah, just look at the Pasuk, and then we'll see why this is relevant. So the Pasuk in Devarim. So says the Pasuk, it says in Devarim, again, you shall make for yourselves sukkahs for 7 days, from what you're gathering from the threshing floor and from the wine here, your vat, from the wine press. So we see there's a Pasuk that talks about sukkahs, and it talks about the threshing floor and the wine vat. Says the Gemara, what do you find on the threshing floor and what do you find in the wine press? The solis gorin v'yakev. You find the waste products, the leftovers from the threshing and from the wine pressing. That's what the Pasuk is talking about. The Torah says you shall make your sukkahs for 7 days out of those things which you find on the threshing floor and in the wine press. Look at Rashi, top line of Rashi. Besolis goren. What is the waste products after threshing? Kashin, the straw. whatever's left behind after having removed the wheat from the chaff, whatever's left behind. And Pasolas Yekev, Zemoros, says Rashi, Ashkelos Rekanim. Zemoros are like the stalks, or the grape stalks, and the bunches, which have no longer, once you've removed the grapes, all you've got left are the stalks and the bunches left. So the woody material. Yeah. So we can derive from that. Yeah. What do we know about the Pasoles of threshing and wine vat, wine press? They are gedule karka. They are things which have grown from the ground, and they're not makabel tumah. So here, this is a perfect source for the fact that the schach has to be made out of those two things. Why? Because the sukkah is just mentioned in the very same posuk of these things. Why did the Torah say you should do it? Because literally the posuk is talking about the time of year you should make sukkahs, which is at the harvest time, when you have threshed your grain and you have pressed your grapes. Yeah, but we can derive from the fact that Torah puts it in the same posuk as sukkah to tell us that it's telling us that what the schach should be made from. However, after the Gemara, the fourth line of the Gemara, ve'emo goin atzmo v'yekev atzmo. Well, perhaps, says the Gemara, that the Torah was talking about the threshing itself, that which is threshed and that which is pressed, not the waste products, but the initial things you bring in. So perhaps it should come from, look at Rashi, Yekev, no, it doesn't, Rashi doesn't, go in Atzmo Yekev Atzmo, end of the first line. Hakashim in Atvua. Perhaps what the Torah meant was, what you use for schach is the straw together with the grain. And the ashkolios im hanavim, and the bunches together with the grapes. Which would be something which, because they're foodstuffs, they are makabel tumah. So perhaps that's what the Torah meant. Perhaps the Torah was saying you can use things, you can use foodstuffs which are makabel tumah. Perhaps that's what the Torah meant. It didn't mean the waste products which aren't makabel tumah. Perhaps it meant even the foodstuffs themselves and which are makabel tumah. Understand the question? So it says the Gemara, beginning of the fifth line, Amar B'Zeira, Yekev Ksiv. Come. Says the Reb Zera, no, the Torah writes here the word Yekev. And Rashi says, the mashma l'acha shenase yayin. What is the Yekev, the wine press? It's whatever's left over after you've squeezed out the fruit. The fruit's gone. It's what's left afterwards. It's all the waste products. It doesn't say yayin. It doesn't say you should use the wine or the grain. It says use whatever's left over. And it's impossible to use the wine anyway. You couldn't use wine as schach. It's just not going to work. Not physically possible. So it has to be what's left over. If it's saying the wine press, it must mean the waste product left over after you've removed the wine, or grape juice, whatever, the juice. And it must be that because it's impossible to use the wine itself. Says the Gemara, Mat Kifla Rabbi Yirmiyah. If Yirmiyah challenges it and says, no, maybe still be possible. Yayin Karush Haba Misnir. Perhaps no, it actually could be wine. It could be congealed wine that comes from a place called Snir. I'm not sure what happened in this place, but obviously, and somehow the wine there used to congeal. Shudome le'egule devela, and it became like solidified, like fig cakes. Now, again, the Gemara talks about these like this egule devela a lot. These ideas, they used to take figs and sort of thread them together into a circular fig cake and then trace them out to dry. It's a well-known thing. And this is what this congealed wine used to look like. Perhaps they must have left some of the shemarim, some of the maybe some of the skin in it or something, whatever, and it congealed and it solidified into like this mass. So perhaps you could use that. Perhaps you could use that as your schach. It's perfectly possible to lay that on as schach. So perhaps the Torah is telling you that it's not the waste products, but actually the initial fruit itself, even though it's mikabel tumah, and therefore perhaps schach could be made for something which was mikabel tumah. So it says the Gemara. Yeah.
But this whole element of connecting those items based on a sentence that says timing, is this a kind of, somebody suggested actually maybe the sentence is trying to tell us what we can use, and then the debate is, if that's true, how does that work out? Or is there a common theme that it's accepted that the sentence is telling us what we should be able to use for the schach, as opposed to just the basic reading of the sentence telling you the timing of when Sukkot is?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, the basic reading of the pasuk is at the time of your threshing, your ingathering and your threshing, that's when you should celebrate Sukkot. So it's telling us when in the year. Gemara comes along and says, actually, the Torah is not only telling you that, but it's also telling you something else as well.
So that second bit of it's telling you something else as well, that's accepted by all, it's telling you something else. And then the question is, what is it telling you? Or is it just some might think it's telling you something else and some might not? Yeah,
so this is the opinion of, so the Gemara tells us, this is Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is suggesting, Rabbi Yochanan had a Masorah, he had a tradition, that this pasuk can be read in two ways. Firstly, date-wise, and secondly, halachas in relation to schach-wise. He had this tradition. Yeah, no, of course, not everyone would have had this tradition. Yeah, so not everyone would agree with him. But, again, based on the principles we have for deriving halacha, we would be able to say, do we accept his opinion or not?
Okay.
Yeah, but this is this Gemara is the source. Also, there's Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. If you look at the third line of the Gemara, you'll see an asterisk at the beginning of the line. And again, take you to the right hand side, and there's a little abbreviation that says Rosh Hashanah Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. So the Gemara there also talks about this idea of why did the Torah find it necessary to tell us this? Yeah, put it in this, because the question is, it could have just said B'chodesh Hashvi'i B'chamesh Ashrei B'chodesh. It could have said in the 7th month on the 15th of the month, like it says about other festivals, right? Why tie it in with something very specific? Now, look, you could argue, okay, well, it's just telling you in this season, that's what you should do it. But it's clearly opening opportunity. It's encoding something in there. Yeah?
Yeah, got it.
So that gives the license. If you have a Masorah, you obviously can't make it up. You can't say, well, the Torah says something and therefore it means something else. If you have a tradition, that's what it means. That's why it put it that way. Then we can go somewhere with it. Yeah? But you see how even with that Masorah, which is saying the Torah is encoding to us halachas in relation to kosher schach, we still have an argument because we're saying, what is it? What halach is it telling us? Is it telling us not makabel tumah, or is it telling us even if it is makabel tumah? Which bit are we driving it from? So
there's still that discussion whether or not the discussion is from people who accept it's telling you what the sukkah should be made of. That verse, it's still assuming that verse is telling you.
That's right. So even if you accept, even if you accept that it's coming to tell you more than just date, but also halachas in relation, we're still going to argue what halachas is it telling us.
Yeah.
And
so we start from that point rather than start from saying, I don't accept that it's telling you anything additional about the time.
Which we did see with the word, with that prophet we started of ve'ed ya'aleh min ha'aretz. We would say you can only use that pasuk if you hold that the sukkahs themselves were anei hakavod.
Yeah.
It's a non-starter if you of the opinion that when the Torah says Basukos or Shatis Bnei Yisrael that it calls the Jewish people to dwell in sukkahs, what he meant there was Anani HaKavod. But if you don't hold that, then the other one is a non-starter.
Disappears.
Yeah. Good question.
Thank you.
Yep, fine. Okay, so says the Gemara. So we're now 2, 4, 6, 8 lines down, one word in. So perhaps we're saying that you could even use congealed wine, and therefore that would mean that foodstuffs, which are makabel tumah, are kosher for schach. So Amar Rav Zera, so Rav Zera says something very interesting here. He says, Hamilsa hu biyadan. He says, up to this point, we had the matter in our hands. We were clear what the Torah meant. We were clear the Torah meant waste products from the threshing floor and from the wine press, meaning those things which are left behind. They're gedule karka, but they're not makabel tumah. Can't be foodstuffs. V'ata Rav Yirmiyah v'shada bei narga. But along comes Rav Yirmiyah with his question about this wine, this congealed wine of the place called Shinar. And what he's done is he's put an axe. He says he's put an axe through it all. He just destroyed it for us. Look at Rashi. Rashi the second of the narrow lines. No, sorry. The last of the wide lines of Rashi. 4 lines down in Rashi. Ha milsa have biadan ad hashta hanu suvarim liyadei timer mishnasenu min hakarka hazeh besoros hakasu medaber. Up to this point, we were clear. We thought we knew the reason that the apostle used this terminology was to tell us besoles, to tell us the waste products. The efshar l'sachech b'yayin, because it would be impossible to use wine for schach. V'ata Rav Yirmiyah, but along comes Rav Yirmiyah. Shehizke lanu yayin karish haba mishnir. But Rav Yirmiyah comes along and throws it all up in the air by mentioning this congealed wine from this place, opens the possibility that perhaps you could use foodstuffs themselves. It is possible. V'shadei bein narga, says Rashi, ketzatza begarzen. He cuts it up with an axe. Klomer. Heishiv to Shuva Nitzchis. He answers with a winning argument, or the winning question, or winning answer. I've got no answer to it. He's found an argument. I've got no argument. I got no comeback to. So up to now we thought we knew what we were talking about. Now we don't even know what we're talking about. So we're still no closer to knowing. So Gemara goes on and says, Rav Ashi Amar. Rav Ashi says, let's go back to the Pasuk again, look at the Pasuk again. We won't derive it from the words yekev. Yeah, we won't derive it from the word wine press. Ella migarnecha, from your threshing floor. V'lo goin atzmo. And what it means is from your threshing floor and not the threshing itself. Miekvecha, from your wine press, v'lo yekev atzmo, and not from the wine itself. Look at Rashi, about 4 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi. Rav Ashi Amar, Rav Ashi says, Shape Mashma. Rav Ashi has a very good derivation of our pasuk. Besoles mikra dechsiv, that it is the waste products that the Torah is talking about. Osbecha migarnecha. The Torah says you shall gather from the gathering in of your threshing floor. Mashma she'ata osifu v'notlu min hagoren. It implies that you are gathering and taking from the threshing floor. The goren hu ha'ochel. And the threshing is the food itself. Umash ata osif ubore mitocho ubasoles. What is it that you thresh from it? You thresh the wheat from the chaff. And we're telling you, take from what's left over. After having threshed, take from that? What do you take from that once the wheat has been extracted? What do you take from what's left? It can only be the pesolis, the waste products. What's left over after pressing the wine has flowed away? Only the waste products. So that from that we can now be clear. By a very careful reading of the pasuk, it is clear that even though you could possibly say, well, even if it's theoretically possible to use wine from congealed wine, we now knock that out of the park by saying, no, the Torah was specifically talking about those things which are left over after having removed the ochel, the foodstuff itself. And the Gemara goes and says, and almost like finishes off by saying, so from the threshing for it, and not from the threshing itself, from the wine press and not from the wine itself. Rav Chisda says there's another pasuk we can support it through. Now, this has come from the book of Nehemiah, which we don't normally derive halachas. We normally always, when we're looking to derive halachas, it has to be from the Torah, not from any other part of Tanakh. So this is merely a support for what we've now already established. And the pasuk says in Nehemiah, Su'u hahar, he says, go into the mountains, ve'vu ale zayis vale eit shemen, and go and bring leaves from the branches of olives and leaves from an olive tree, vale hadas and hadassim branches, myrtle branches, vale tamarim and palm branches, vale eit avos, and from branches from a braided tree. Okay, says Rashi, Pasuk Hu b'Sefer Ezra. He says it's from the book of Ezra. Some write Ezra and Nehemiah together. La'asos Sukkos. So Nehemiah was telling the Jewish people, go and gather materials for making your sukkah. And all the things he tells them, to go and gather are all things which A, grow in the ground, and B, aren't makabel tumah. So we see a practical example of the halacha that we've just derived from that pasuk in Devarim, which is that it has to have these two things. It has to be something which is grown from the ground, which isn't makabel tumah. Therefore, it cannot be foodstuffs. Gemara has one final question on this pasuk. Pasuk said, it said, ale hadas, myrtle leaves or branches, and ale eitz avos, and the branches of a eitz avos, which means a braid, like a braided tree, which is in fact the pasuk in the Torah that we talk about. L'chachtem lachem bayom harishon pri eitz hadav v'kavov senorim eitz avos. We learn myrtle hadassim is the eitz avos, is the branch from a braided tree. So Gemara says hainu hadas hainu eitz avos. There seems to be a repetition in the pasuk here. It talks about atzei ale hadas and ale eitz avos, which are one and the same thing, says the Gemara. Look at Rashi. Hainu ale hadas hainu eitz avos. Mahu zeh. What's the difference between the two? Lahaski shneim, that you mentioned both of them. B'mikra in the pasuk. Halo echad heim hadas who eitz avos. Our shame that this hadas myrtle is also the branch of a braided tree. Why sha'alim murkavin zeh mezeh? Because if you see the myrtle, the leaves on the myrtle surround the twig. Yeah, there are normally three. The ones we use are three leaves at each level. So they surround murkavim zeh. They surround each other. Kumin avutos v'sharshos, like some sort of chain or braid or a ring. So why is the Apostle talking about mentioning hadas twice? Once ale hadas and once ale eitz avos. They're both one and the same thing. So says the Gemara, Amrav Chisda hadas shoter l'sukkah. The Apostle, when it says hadas, was talking about hadas shoter. Shoter means like a foolish hadas. Says Rashi, Hadash shote, sheinu kasha lulav. It's a shota, meaning it's an irregular shota. It's an irregular hadas. It doesn't have the 3 leaves on each level. Sheinu kasha lulav, which wouldn't be kosher for a lulav. If it's she'ein abusa asui shel shalosh alen, because it doesn't have that thickness, braidedness of 3 and 3 leaves. And therefore, he was saying you can bring. There are different types of hadasim. There's a hadas that grows with only 2 leaves or 2 or 1 leaves on each bit. It's avos lulav, where there is twigs that come from a braided tree, which is kosher for lulav. So there are different. We're talking about there are different types of hadas, and that's why the pasuk used 2 different terminologies for it. Okay, it's not a superfluous thing. Okay, so that's the end of that piece of Gemara, and we end off by saying that the 2 things. The general rule is that schach has to be made from those things which are gedulei karka, go from the ground, and are not makabel tumah. We derive it from that pasuk, which is psoles goren v'yekev. It is the waste product of those things which have previously grown in the ground but aren't makabel tumah. They're not foodstuffs. Okay, let's just start the next Mishnah. It's a short Mishnah, and then Mitzvah Shem will carry on the Gemara next time. Says the Mishnah, we having spoken previously, the previous Mishnah was things which are kosher and possible for schach. This Mishnah continues in the same vein. Chavile kash v'chavile eitzim v'chavile zaradin, and bundles of straw and bundles of wood and bundles of zaridin, says Rashi, are min kanim, a type of reed or a cane. Shu'osim zaradin, made into like bundles. We've got him also, and they're bound together. When they are moist, these reeds or canes, then they are animal fodder. But when they dry out, they're used for firewood. So bundles of these things, bundles of straw, bundles of wood, bundles of reeds, you cannot use them for schach. Says Rashi, when they are bound together. The Gemara will explain why. We'll see there are 2 possibilities as to why these bundles are possible. We're going to see either because the Gzeres Otzer, because the rabbis made a decree saying you cannot use, if someone was to have like an outhouse or a hut or something which had kosher schach on it, but they didn't put it on there for the purposes of schach. They would just put it on there anyway. It was there all year round, and it wasn't, it was just there for shade. Rabbis didn't want people to just go into that and use that as a sukkah. That's one reason possibly why this is no good, because that's people used to put these bundles of straw or reeds or wood to dry or just to create shade. The other reason possibly would be this, and we've learned this before, which is ta'asuv lo min ha'asur. That sukkah has to be made and not has to be actively made and not something which is ready made. And again, if you're going to put these bundles up, so when you put them up on top of your sukkah, even if for the sake of sukkah, when you put them up there, they're possible for schach because they're not fit to be used as schach. If you were then to come and untie them, they do become them kosher schach. But at the time, is the untying of them sufficient an act to be considered to be asuyim min olam ta'aseh? So those are the 2 possible reasons. We're going to see the Gemara is going to talk very interesting. Rabbi Yaakov says, we're going to see the Gemara will say, Rabbi Yaakov says, I heard 2 reasons, but I can't remember which one replies to which situation. So that's what we'll leave that message for next time. Let's just finish off the Mishnah. So these bundles cannot be used for schach. V'kulan shehitirin kisheros. But if they were untied, then there's nothing perfectly acceptable as schach. Says Rashi, v'kulan habasulin sheshashinu b'schach. Any of these things which are possible that we've learned for schach. Yeah. V'kulan kasherus v'defanos. And anything that we've mentioned up to this point, that we've said is possible for schach, is perfectly fit to be used for the walls. There are no restrictions as to what you use for the walls. So it can be things which are attached to the ground. It can be things which are makabel tumah. Anything can be used for the walls. How do we know? Look at Rashi. Because whenever the Torah talks about sukkah, mentions the word sukkah, it means schach. Because schach is, I mean, we saw this right at the beginning of the Masechta. Schach is what defines the sukkah, and obviously it's the same shurish as well, same root of the word. Yeah. The dofen lo ikri sukkah, because the walls are not called the sukkah. With an afkalan, as we derived on Dalet Omid Aleph and Vav Omid Beis, defanos mibasuka basukos meyesira to krai yafinan. And Rashi says an interesting point here. You might say, hold on a second. You're saying that whenever the Torah talks about the word sukkah, it means schach. But we know, do you remember we learned on Dalet Omid Aleph, on Vav Omid Beis, that we do derive something from the word sukkah in relation to the walls. When the Torah says basukos, yeah, we said that the Torah put it in the plural. It says it twice, and therefore we had a whole argument. Does it mean 2 walls, 3 walls, 4 walls? Yeah. So we do derive something about the walls from the word sukkah. The fact that the Torah uses the word sukkah apparently with some sometimes unnecessarily, superfluously, from that we can derive the number of walls at minimum for a sukkah. So you can't say that we never use the word sukkah in relation to walls. So says Rashi, you're right, and that's why he brings it out. He brings it out. However, it's a limited use. It's telling us we can derive from the word sukkah the number of walls, but we don't derive from it what the walls are to be made of. And the distinction is that we have a pasuk that tells us about what the schach has to be made of. The pasuk we just saw, yeah, that we spent a long time explaining from your threshing floor and from your wine press. Yeah, that was another pasuk that defines what the schach has to be made from. We don't have that in relation to the walls. Yeah. So the mention of the word sukkah is in relation to the walls is only in terms of quantity, not as in quality. Whereas when we talk about sukkah, when we talk about the schach, it means both quantity. Well, it doesn't mean quantity, but it means the quality of, the definition of what is schach is then derived from that. And that's what we really mean. Okay. So, yes, so the Mishnah says that anything, even if it was possible for schach, can be used for the walls because we have no limitations as to what materials can be used for the walls. Okay, we'll leave it there. As I said, the Gemara now say, where do we know that you cannot use these bundles for schach? And we're going to possibly say, as I said, there are 2 possibilities of the source of it. We just need to work out which one applies to our scenario and which one would apply to something perhaps like a haystack, which we mentioned another time. Yeah, if you were to hollow out a haystack, would that be a problem? We said it's possible as a sukkah. Are we going to say, is that because it's of Gezeres Otzer, because the rabbi said you cannot turn something which was one thing into a sukkah? It was initially made as a haystack with no intention for it to be used as a sukkah, and then you hollowed out the space inside it, but the schach was there all the time. Or will we say, well, no, you can't use a haystack because its schach was pre-made before you had the schach before you had the airspace. Whereas we know the way you build a sukkah is you create the airspace, you create the walls, and then you put the schach on top. And therefore it's actively made, doesn't come into being from something which is prefab, shall we say. Okay, so Mr. Sim, we'll see that Gemara next time. All right, keep well, everyone. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.